every crime is a wound on the world. We're here to dissect it, layer by layer, to find the truth buried within. This is Anatomy of Crime. The air inside the sprawling, Mediterranean-style mansion in Rancho Santa Fe, California, was heavy, stale, and uniquely sweet. It was Wednesday, March 26, 1997. San Diego County Sheriff's Deputy Robert Brunk approached the massive front door of the home. He was responding to an anonymous tip, a strange phone call referencing an unbelievable claim of mass suicide. The neighborhood was one of immense wealth, characterized by manicured lawns, private tennis courts, and high-security gates. It was not a place where the macabre typically intruded. But as Brunk and his partner entered the residence, the profound silence of the 9,000-square-foot home offered the first hint that something was terribly wrong. The pungent odor of decomposition, masked poorly by the sharp chemical scent of cleaning supplies, guided them through the echoing hallways. What the deputies found inside would become etched into the darkest annals of American history. In room after darkened room, bodies lay perfectly still on bunk beds and mattresses. There was no blood, no sign of struggle, no chaotic disarray. Instead, there was a horrifying, meticulous order. Each victim was dressed identically. They wore dark, long-sleeved shirts, black sweatpants, and brand-new black and white Nike Decade running shoes. Over the chest and face of each individual lay a square purple shroud. Beside them, neatly packed travel bags sat as if awaiting a sudden departure. In the pockets of their matching uniforms, investigators would later find exactly $5.75 in cash, alongside a tube of lip balm. On their sleeves, they wore meticulously crafted patches bearing the words, "Heaven's Gateway Team." Today, we dissect the anatomy of a cybercult. We will explore the precise intersection of early internet culture, science fiction theology, and the devastating psychological control required to orchestrate this unprecedented tragedy. We will trace the path from a chance meeting in a Texas hospital to a lethal cocktail consumed under the shadow of a passing comet. To understand the peaceful, horrific finality of Rancho Santa Fe, we must go back 25 years to Houston, Texas. The year was 1972. Marshall Herff Applewhite was a man in profound crisis. He was the son of a Presbyterian minister, a charismatic and talented music professor with a commanding baritone voice. But beneath his polished exterior, Applewhite was deeply fractured. He was struggling intensely with his sexuality, moving between a conventional marriage, affairs, and a profound sense of religious guilt. His career had stalled, his marriage had ended, and he felt utterly adrift. He checked himself into a hospital, seeking a psychiatric remedy for the turmoil in his mind. It was within this medical setting that he crossed paths with Bonnie Lou Nettles. Nettles was a registered nurse, but her true passions lay far beyond the clinical world of the hospital. She was deeply immersed in theosophy, astrology, biblical prophecy, and the burgeoning New Age movement. When Applewhite and Nettles met, the connection was instantaneous and electric. It was not a romantic connection, but rather a profound, shared delusion that ignited immediately. They convinced each other that their meeting was preordained. Nettles told Applewhite that he was a highly evolved spiritual being. Applewhite, desperate for meaning and a way to transcend his earthly struggles, eagerly accepted this narrative. They began to formulate a shared theology that was a bizarre, yet highly structured synthesis of Christian scripture, science fiction, and ascetic mysticism. They decided that they were the two witnesses described in the book of Revelation. According to Scripture, these witnesses would preach for 1,000 days, be assassinated, and then be resurrected and taken up to heaven in a cloud. Applewhite and Nettles modernized this text. The cloud, they decided, was not a weather phenomenon, but a literal spacecraft. They abandoned their families, their jobs, and their earthly identities. They took on various monikers, calling themselves Bo and Peep, and eventually Do and T. Their theology rested on a fundamental, unyielding premise. They believed that the earth was merely a garden, a stepping stone for spiritual development. Above humanity existed a literal physical realm they called the evolutionary level above human, or the next level. To reach this next level, a soul had to shed everything that made it human. They referred to the human body merely as a vehicle or a container. All mammalian behaviors and attachments had to be systematically destroyed. This meant eradicating sexual desire, severing ties with family, discarding personal wealth, and eliminating even the most basic individual preferences. In 1975, Do and T held a meeting in Waldport, Oregon, promising attendees that a UFO would soon arrive to take those who were ready to the next level. Astonishingly, roughly 20 people walked away from their lives that night, leaving behind bewildered families and sparking a brief, intense media frenzy about a mysterious UFO cult. But the spaceship did not arrive in 1975. When the prophecy failed, Do and T did not disband the group. Instead, they used the disappointment to tighten their grip. They took their followers underground, embarking on a nomadic existence across the United States. This period, stretching through the late 70s and 80s, was the crucible in which the anatomy of their psychological control was perfected. The group camped in remote areas, living in tents and relying on a highly regimented, authoritarian structure. The psychological conditioning was absolute. Followers were stripped of their birth names and given new names ending in the suffix "odi." They were subjected to intense surveillance, not just by leadership, but by each other. They operated on a buddy system, where partners were rotated constantly to prevent any deep human bonds from forming. Every minute of the day was scheduled. They practiced tuning in, a meditation technique designed to align their thoughts perfectly with Do and T. The control extended to the most intimate aspects of their physical existence. Diets were strictly controlled and constantly changing, sometimes consisting only of liquid fasts or strange combinations of food. Sleep was regulated. Most crucially, sexuality was strictly forbidden. The ultimate goal was to become an androgynous, emotionless crew, ready for service in the next level. The suppression of the human drive was so extreme that several male members of the group, including Marshall Applewhite himself, eventually opted for surgical castration to permanently silence their physical urges. This was not viewed as a mutilation, but as a triumphant victory over the mammalian vehicle. In 1985, the cult's theology faced a catastrophic challenge. Bonnie Nettles, known as T, died of liver cancer. This struck at the very heart of their belief system. Do and T had always taught that they would physically ascend to the next level in their current bodily vehicles. Death was supposed to be overcome. Applewhite was devastated and faced a profound crisis of legitimacy. If T was truly a divine representative from the next level, how could her vehicle succumb to a human disease? Applewhite retreated, mourned, and then emerged with a vital theological pivot. This pivot would ultimately seal the fate of the remaining members. He announced that T had successfully returned to the next level, but she had merely discarded her broken physical vehicle to do so. The body was, after all, just a temporary container. Her spirit had traveled back to the spacecraft. This subtle but profound shift in doctrine changed the trajectory of Heaven's Gate. It planted the seed that physical death was not a failure of ascension, but could be a viable, even necessary, mechanism for it. As the group moved into the 1990s, they settled in the San Diego area. They transitioned from living in wilderness camps to renting large homes, establishing a monastic but highly technological lifestyle. The world around them was changing rapidly. The early internet, the World Wide Web, was just beginning to permeate the public consciousness. For most of society, the internet was a novelty. For Heaven's Gate, it was the ultimate tool for their mission. It was an anonymous global megaphone. They formed a web design business called Higher Source. It is a chilling irony that this group of ascetic, isolated individuals, deeply disconnected from society, became early pioneers of commercial web design. They were proficient in early HTML, Java, and graphic design. They built websites for local businesses, hiding their true nature behind a veil of corporate professionalism. Their clients knew them as polite, meticulously punctual, identically dressed programmers who worked in complete harmony. They had no idea they were funding a doomsday cult. But the internet served a more vital, sinister purpose for Marshall Applewhite. Heaven's Gate used the web to digitize their theology. They created their own expansive website, a chaotic mix of flashing text, starry backgrounds, and dense sci-fi-infused manifestos. They posted heavily on Usenet newsgroups, warning of an impending Earth recycling and offering the only available ticket to survival. They uploaded a series of videos titled Beyond Human, featuring Deuce staring directly into the camera, his intense, unblinking eyes promising salvation to those who would shed their humanity. They were a cult that had evolved perfectly for the digital age, using the architecture of the early web to cast a wide, invisible net. The fatal catalyst arrived in the night sky. In 1995, astronomers discovered the Hale-Bopp comet. By late 1996, it was becoming visible to the naked eye, a spectacular celestial event. But in the dark corners of the early internet, conspiracy theories began to bloom. A rumor started circulating on late-night paranormal radio shows, most notably Art Bell's Coast to Coast AM, and across early internet message boards. The rumor claimed that a massive, unnatural object, a companion spacecraft, was trailing behind the comet. For Marshall Applewhite, this was the sign he had been waiting for since 1985. He interpreted this rumor as undeniable truth. The companion object was not a natural anomaly. It was a spacecraft from the next level. And more importantly, T was on board, waiting to pick up Dew and their dedicated crew. The Earth was about to be spaded under, recycled to make way for a new era. The only escape was to rendezvous with the ship hiding in the comet's tail. The preparation for the end was as methodical and meticulous as their web design. They rented the sprawling mansion in Rancho Santa Fe, paying in advance with cash generated from their Higher Source contracts. They began to purchase their exit equipment, the matching Nike Decade shoes, the black sweatpants, the dark shirts. They ordered a large quantity of phenobarbital, a powerful barbiturate, which they meticulously ground into a fine powder. They purchased unsweetened applesauce, pudding, and cheap vodka. They bought dozens of plastic bags. In the days leading up to the event, they recorded farewell videos. These tapes are some of the most deeply unsettling artifacts in the history of true crime. One by one, the members of Heaven's Gate sat before the camera, flanked by trees and a bright blue sky. They were not crying. They were not trembling. They were joyful. They smiled broadly, speaking of their impending deaths with the casual excitement of travelers preparing for a long-awaited vacation. They spoke of shedding their vehicles, of returning to their true home in the heavens. The absolute success of Applewhite's psychological conditioning was on full, horrifying display. The natural human instinct for survival had been completely overwritten by code. The exit, as they called it, began on or around March 22, 1997. It was an orchestrated multi-day operation. 39 people cannot die simultaneously in a synchronized manner without logistical planning. They divided themselves into 3 groups. The first wave, consisting of 15 members, consumed the lethal cocktail of phenobarbital mixed into the applesauce or pudding, washed down with vodka to accelerate the central nervous system depression. Once they lay down and the drugs began to take hold, the remaining members helped them secure plastic bags over their heads to ensure asphyxiation. When the first group had passed, the living removed the plastic bags, placed the purple shrouds over the faces and torsos of the deceased, and posed the bodies with their packed bags. The mansion remained silent and orderly. The next day, 15 more members repeated the exact same process, assisted by the remaining 9. Finally, the last group took their lethal doses. The final 2 members, a man and a woman, who were tasked with ensuring everyone else had successfully exited, were the only ones found without the purple shrouds covering their faces, as there was no one left to perform the final ritual. Marshall Applewhite died in the 3rd wave, in the master bedroom of the mansion. The discovery of the crime scene was not accidental. It was part of the plan. A former member of the group, a man named Richard Ford, who went by the next-level name Rio D'Angelo, had left the mansion weeks prior by mutual agreement. On Tuesday, March 25th, he received a FedEx package at his workplace in Los Angeles. Inside were videotapes, a letter, and 2 computer disks containing the group's final press release. The letter explicitly stated that by the time he received the package, the group would have shed their containers. D'Angelo drove to the Rancho Santa Fe mansion, entered through an unlocked side door, and confirmed the horrific truth. The smell alone told him what had happened. He left the house and made an anonymous call to the San Diego Sheriff's Department, setting into motion the arrival of Deputy Brunk. The investigation that followed was unprecedented. The medical examiner's office had to rent refrigerated trucks to handle the sheer volume of bodies. Toxicologists worked around the clock to confirm the exact cocktail used. Relatives who had not seen their loved ones in 20 years were suddenly called to identify bodies in a makeshift morgue. But the mystery was not in the mechanics of the death. The forensics were straightforward. The true mystery, the anatomy that baffled the public and investigators alike, was the profound, peaceful willingness of 39 intelligent adults to meticulously orchestrate their own demise. In the aftermath, the Heaven's Gate website remained active. 2 surviving members who were tasked with maintaining the digital archive continue to keep the site exactly as it looked in 1997. It sits on the modern internet like a digital ghost ship, a relic of early HTML and flashing text that stands as a monument to fatal delusion. It is a chilling reminder that the group viewed their actions not as a tragedy, but as a triumph of technology and theology. The anatomy of Heaven's Gate is a testament to the terrifying vulnerability of the human mind. It demonstrates how isolation, absolute authority, and the promise of a higher purpose can systematically dismantle the most fundamental human instincts. Marshall Applewhite did not use physical violence to hold his followers captive. He built a prison of belief, brick by theological brick. Over 25 years, he exploited the human search for meaning, weaponized their desire to belong to something greater, and perfectly timed their ultimate surrender to the passing of a silent comet. It is a stark, devastating portrait of what happens when the search for a higher truth demands the ultimate, terrible sacrifice of reality. This has been Anatomy of Crime, where the truth is never simple, but always worth seeking.